$15 wool sounds just asinine. When you look at the tokenomics, the amount of wool that we are burning, even like right now, and the game hasn't even really heated up yet. I mean, this literally, wool has an entire ecosystem, a team building, a community around it, and all of it is designed to burn wool. It's designed to burn wool and create demand for wool. So it's literally, I can't find another project in crypto that has that infrastructure set up to just literally pump the hell out of it.
Welcome back to Beyond the Den. Today, we're navigating the intriguing terrain of Wolf Game with none other than Farmer Piddy, the analytical maverick who sees trends before they emerge. Get ready for an intellectual adventure, and be sure to stay tuned to the end, where we dive deep into his bold prediction about $15 wool. Let's unravel the game beyond the obvious. Farmer Piddy, welcome to the show.
Hey, it's good to be here. It's like the middle of the summer. I am still wearing my woolish hoodie. I feel like it was going to be sacrilegious not to wear it on the show. So, but yeah, I'll break it out for certain events like this, even though it's 98 degrees outside and the sun is beating down on us. So
you get a nice little glow on you.
Oh yeah. It's a little perfect, a little glistening, a little sweat. Never hurt anybody.
Exactly. So you've been in Wolf Game for how long? Like, what kind of dragged you into the Wolf Game ecosystem?
So, I started buying heavily for me. I'm not a whale by any means, but I started taking it more seriously and buying a little bit over a year ago. But I had been following it pretty much since Risky Game. So pretty early on in the project, that's when I started kind of paying attention. Really paid attention through Cave Game and whatnot. One of my good friends, B. Godwin, he is, he's been in the project almost since day one. And he's just, I've known him for a long time. And I knew that like, if he was taking Wolf Game seriously, like I really needed to pay attention, just cause I really respect his takes in the crypto sphere. And yeah, so I kind of been like talking about Wolf Game a lot with him, but I was kind of shy to pull the trigger for the first, I guess, like 6 or 7 months of paying attention to it. But then, really since like the middle of last summer, or I guess early last summer, that's when I started accumulating some wool. And then last fall is when I really started accumulating assets.
Yeah, that's so cool too, to have that. It's we have a lot of in real life friends that look at us like we're crazy, right?
Yep.
When we talk about anything crypto, but especially NFTs and Wolf Game. Yep. I just went golfing with 3 of my normie in real life friends that I grew up with, and they're all a bunch of ball busters, but I spoke about Wolf Game, I would say 88% of the time.
Yeah.
Literally in totally the middle of my backswing, right? But I think I actually had one of them that was like super intrigued. He's an accountant, and so he started thinking about, the wool. He was very intrigued by wool and and the tokenomics on that end. So I just thought that was pretty cool. But so as far as memorable moments in Wolf Game, what is the most memorable for you?
So, I mean, it's hard to pick, right? I've got so many like exciting times, but for me, probably the biggest moment was when I had my first successful breed of a sheep. So I think a big reason that was such a big moment for me was, like I said, I'd been kind of like watching from the sidelines. So like I missed out on Cave Game. And I was kind of like watching the party happen, and it was like my breeding experience. That was really the first time that I had gained something from the game. Like I had actually like played and produced something of value. So that was a really big, I think, just moment for me because, like I said, it's something that I had been paying attention to at that point for about a year and a half. And then full game finally released. And then, I was able to actually start breeding. So that was a big moment for me. And then I would say the other one is definitely getting this hoodie. Definitely, that was just a bigger moment than I think I realized it would be. I knew it was kind of special when I ordered the hoodie, like on the last day of the claim. But at the time, you're spending like, I think I spent like 0.08 ETH on something that very rarely does that actually feel good to spend the ETH, but like when it hit the mail, and I actually like unpackaged it, and my socks, it was just a cool experience, right? And the kids there with me, and they're asking questions and whatnot. It was a cool experience for the family, and something I won't forget. And honestly, I'm a wolf gamer for life, so I treat this hoodie with absolute respect, and I plan to be wearing it in another 40 years. So
Perfect. First edition.
yeah, exactly.
And think about the branding and the packaging. That's when you really know that a company is doing the right thing. That's how it's like going into a restaurant. The first thing I do is I check out the bathrooms. That's like one of the things that my wife looks at me like I'm nuts. Every time I go, I got to go check out the bathrooms. If a bathroom has a put together bathroom, if there's no overflowing of toilet paper and garbage coming out, I usually say, well, they got their stuff together.
Yep.
With packaging and the material, right, of it's 100% wool.
Yeah. And even like if you think about like Apple, like the same exact thing. Like
so clean.
Packaging matters, right? And it's this attention to detail like you're talking about. It's phenomenal.
Yeah, virgin wool.
Virgin wool. Like I said, I don't know if virgin wool is actually the real thing, but I know that there is real virgin wool in the world, and I like to believe that my hoodie is virgin wool and hasn't been tampered with or touched or been recycled at all.
Tampered with or touched. That's the true virgin in you.
That's right.
Very cool. So going and I thought that your point, when you actually did get that sheep, right? You knew that the game worked at that point, right? You had mentioned that you got something out of it.
Yep. And obviously it's not on the same level as taking profits. Like I understand that. I'm not clueless. But like at the same time, like I'm creating value. I'm growing my bag. And yeah, there'll be a time where I take some profits. There's nothing like we're all here for taking profits. But I typically don't do that during bear markets. So that's kind of like the opposite of what I actually want to do. So yeah, I think producing, man, that's why I'm all about breeding. Is because I'm able to actually use the game to grow my my wolf game bag, grow my game pieces. Like that's a huge part of the game. Just because it, when you start breeding or whatever your angle is on the game. Breeding in particular for me, it opens up so many options, and there's so many different directions that your game can go once you start breeding.
Interesting. So right out the gate, that was basically your strategy?
Yeah, well, right out of the gate, all I had was one sheep early on. So at first, like out of the gates, I was like, okay, I got to do these I got to collect these resources. And that's kind of what I was focused on. I had my Farmer Piddy PFP. So I had the one farmer, I had one sheep. And then at the time I had like, I don't know, some land or something. I think it was like a 2 land. So, then after the initial, surge of the game, sheep prices came down a little bit and I was able to scoop up another sheep. So at that point, I actually had 2 sheep. And so that just makes it a little easier for breeding. Obviously, you've got to have 2 sheep. It opens up the options. So you don't have to like go on Discord and like try to find someone to breed with and then fight over, who gets the sheep at that point. Like it becomes a little difficult.
I can resonate with that because of my wolf. I only have one wolf.
Oh, the lone wolf. The lone wolf.
The lone black wolf. So yeah, I would reach out. I think I had like 5 or 6 phone calls with other community members about making this work with their sperm, and it was like it was nearly impossible. It's like I had a list. I had like a 20 list questions,
Yeah.
where I'm like, all right, I need to make sure that we have this upfront contract. I'd like to say upfront contract, not something super serious, but like
Right.
an agreement in here that like, hey, like, what are we gonna do with this baby? Like after
Yeah.
after we birth it.
Yeah. And that can get a little tricky. Um, but hopefully it's a little easier for wolves just because you don't have the risk of like, okay, when do you pull this wolf? Like it's not going to get stolen, right? No one can steal a wolf. So,
Yes. However, we were worried about the Shep tweeting about Peak,
oh,
right?
yeah,
So
that's a
we're
good
like,
point.
so what happens if Peak gets called? Do
Yeah.
we just say, all right, we're both gonna just chalk up the wool loss and
Yeah.
the energy loss? So that kept me back. But now,
Yeah.
dude, I mean, you out of the almost pretty much out of the gate pretty early on, you focused on breeding,
Yep.
and that's one of my biggest regrets is that I haven't bred at all. Like it's like because of okay, when's Peak gonna be called?
Yeah.
So it's been how long have we been in full game? Like 6 months.
Basically it's from December. So yeah, it's 7 months basically.
Yeah. So I am behind the ball on breeding. You are a breeding maxi, primarily with sheep,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
So you also have the idea that breeding is going to continually get more and more difficult, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, I have a few thoughts on breeding. One, well, let me explain why I'm a breeding maxi, I guess. Um, I so early on with my conversations with B Godwin, one of the things that we talked a lot about was like we want to play the game the way Shep designed it, right? And if you try to play Wolf game and try to like outsmart Shep or try to anticipate like what his next move is, like you can kind of back yourself into a corner, right? So like, a good example would be, oh, the farmer's market. Like we know there's going to be a farmer's market. I'm going to accumulate. I'm just going to focus on getting all these farmers. And then when the farmer's market comes out and the tax, deadline kicks in and there's no more grace period, I'm going to be able to just like sell all these farmers or rent them out at like a 2 or 3x flip. And then, so like I actually know someone that took that strategy. And at the time it's like, okay, yeah, like I understand your thinking, your process makes sense. Like go for it. And then Shep rolls it out in a way where like
Get crushed.
it didn't work out that way. Right. And I'm not knocking Shep by that. Actually, I think the way he rolled it out was brilliant. But the problem with that is the gameplay, the strategy, it was focused on trying to like outmaneuver the game, outplay the game. When the reality is all you got to do is go to the Wolf Game website, read the wallpaper. It focuses on one thing, breeding. Okay, maybe two things, also collecting resources, right? And kind of like the whole dynamics of the gameplay. But the main emphasis, Shep designed the valley or the farm, some people call it. He designed it for breeding. And so it makes sense to kind of like focus and kind of like that, like I'm going to let that be my main strategy because it's really aligned with really what Shep is telling us to do. He's telling us to breed. That's kind of the whole point of the farm.
Yeah. And when you say breeding, you essentially mean energy, correct?
Yeah. Yeah. So like a big part of that, we know, I'm not sure when the timeline came out on some of these details, but at some point we knew that you were going to be able to take your energy and convert it to peak credits. But even before we knew that, it was very obvious from day one of the launch that it was all about energy. That energy was really, really important. And it was going to be kind of like a central point of the game. And that was, I even was listening to a podcast with Seed Phrase recently. He was on a podcast talking about Wolf Game a little bit. And that was one of the things, he said, out immediately, it was a lot about energy, and he made his strategy kind of focused on that, with his, his swapping tool that he's created, and really trying to utilize or centralize his strategy around that. But then we find out, okay, this energy we're going to be able to convert to peak credits. That's pretty cool. Um, and the other side of it with the breeding is, I like to think about my whole portfolio in number of peak credits, or I should say potential peak credit earnings. So like I have a spreadsheet, and it adds up all of my assets, the total maximum energy I have across all of my sheep. So every time I birth a new sheep, I put that in my little spreadsheet. I'm a geek. I know, make fun of me, but it adds it all up for me. And then I'm actually checking my charges, like where are my sheep at their energy levels. So at any point in time, I know how much energy I currently have, but I also know like what is my maximum output. Okay, so breeding allows me to be raising the ceiling on how many potential peak credits I could have at any given time. So, I know that like we don't have all the details on peak yet, but I'm positioning myself once again with the way Shep has clearly designed the game. He said energy is really important. We know energy is going to be very important at the peak, for peak credits. So breeding is just, like I said, I'm always trying to kind of like grow my maximum energy of my entire bag. And that's why breeding is important, but also like maximum breeding. So, I don't usually, I try not to breed just to a 375 level. Like I want to maximize that breeding time, as much as possible.
Excellent. And for a strategy for breeding, what do you do? Do you have like a farmer strategy? What is that? How do you get the energy? How do you maximize the energy most efficiently?
Yeah. So, well, buried on my Twitter account somewhere, there's a breeding strategy thread I made, with a little diagram, and it kind of, um, it gives a good like snapshot. And I go into like the framework of my strategy a good bit there. But it kind of goes something like this. So, um, I obviously farmer protection is a really important part of breeding, right? And depending on what community you're in, you might need more farmer protection than other communities. Like I know several people in the game that they've bred numerous full maximum energy sheep without using a single farmer. And then, I know other people in the game where it's like they got to use farmers like, left and right. Otherwise, they're going to get broken into. And it's because they're in a community with just really, freaking aggressive wolves, or they're surrounded with, by communities with aggressive wolves. So I think placement on the map matters. But, one way to kind of, I would just say like one way to manage your risk, in breeding. And this happens because risk is on a spectrum, right? It's not just binary. You can spread your farmers out, and it kind of gives you, I'll just say like a spotted protection, right? So, maybe you got a farmer, let's say you got a kid, and it protects you for 2 days. And then once that kid is done, let's say you try to go, maybe an 8-hour gap or a 24-hour gap, or even maybe a 2-day gap, and then you add another farmer. You can kind of spread out your coverage like that, throughout the length of the breed. And it does lower your risk overall, right? Because, the more farmers you add, the higher percentage of the total breed that you'll be protected. So that risk is sort of on a spectrum, and you got to kind of get a good feel for your risk appetite. How big is your wool drip? If your wool drip is a part of your protection strategy, maybe you own the farmers. There's different ways to do it, but, farmers are a critical part of kind of being able to maximize the breeds. I wanted to dive into the 375 energy versus the 750 energy. A big reason why I'm so high on the 750, like breeding to the max, is the base cost. So not including farmers, but just the base cost of the breedings, the fee to actually rent the barn. Um, if you don't have your own barn, you got to pay a barn owner a fee, and you got to pay the base amount of like 1,000. I think it's 1,000 wool. Um, and even if you own your own barn, you still got to pay the 1,000 wool. Then you got to pay the 2,000 grass, right? But also, you got to pay. As a pay, you got to use 200 and is it 250 energy? I'm struggling to remember now.
250.
Yeah, 250 energy. I'm so used to playing the game now, I don't even pay attention to the numbers. It's bad. So you got to use 250 energy from each sheep to even have a shot at producing a Gen 2 sheep. Now, those base costs are the same exact costs, whether you breed a 375 or a 750. Okay. So it essentially, if you can breed higher maximum energy sheep, you're able to grow your I'll just say potential peak credits, your maximum energy, you're growing that at a much lower cost basis than if you just keep going to 375 and pulling. Because what happens is, if you breed to 375 and you pull every time, you have to recharge those sheep a lot more times over the course of a year or two. So your costs to actually produce that energy are going up at a much higher rate than if you just focus on the breeding 750s. So that's kind of the overall strategy of why I breed to the max. One thing that people do say, they kind of check me on, is, well, 2 sheep gathering is better than 1. And I hear you. Like, would you rather have 2 sheep at 375 gathering for you versus 1 at 750? That's a legitimate argument. My answer to that is, the game is about peak credits. Gathering is secondary. It's like, I'm not willing to sacrifice the main point of the game, which is earning as many peak credits as I possibly can, to kind of settle for, I want to gather a few more resources. I think I think that's a big part of kind of like why I have the perspective I have. And it's, I guess the other part of it would be, if breeding 375s is actually the smarter play, then it wouldn't make sense for Shep to design the game where breeding to 750 actually takes on more risk. Like, why would I take on more risk for the dumber play? Does that make sense? So it's like, I hear the 375 argument, but I think there's a reason the game is designed that if you want to breed a 750, you got to have more risk, and it's going to require more resources. And I think Shep is going to make that pay off for us.
Great point. I think overall, you're looking at quality over quantity.
Yep.
In that particular instance, right?
Yeah.
So, you spoke a little bit about going back to some of the tactics when you are breeding and some of the things to look at, right? I want to go back to that, and wolves in particular. If you are a sheep and you are, what are some things to think about with wolves? Like, you need to think about community, right?
Yep.
What community you're in, how many wolves are coming in, if there's a new wolf coming into your community, how often you're checking if that is the circumstance. So if you can kind of break that down a little bit of like some things that you look on the daily or multiple times a day.
Yeah. So right now, I use a really helpful tool called wolfgame.page. And it helps you, like, you can select the community that you're looking at in the filters, and then you can see how many sheep are in your community and what they're gathering. But you can also see how many wolves are in your community. So that is something that I can use to monitor the number of wolves that are in the community. Now, as the game grows, that's going to become a little more challenging, right? Because as wolves breed and as more players come into the game, there's going to be more wolves going in and out of communities. So right now, it's a little bit easier to monitor than, let's say, what it's going to be like another year from now. But that tool is really helpful. So a good example, like I'm in a relatively quiet community. Like there just aren't a whole lot of wolves coming in and out. But I monitor the community every day, at least once, and sometimes depending on where I am in the breeding process, I'll monitor it more closely. Um, but several weeks ago, I was at a kind of a critical point in the breeding where like it was a very risky time, right? I was in probably 75% of the way. So like I've got, actually it was more like 85%. I've got breeds that are almost done nurturing. There's sheep that I could pull and they're at like 700 energy, right? So at that point of the breed, you've got all this time invested, you've got all this resources, however many farmer protections you've used to get up to that point. There's a lot on the table. Sure
And
enough.
how many days are you in to that? Like that's what,
Well,
20 days or so?
yeah, it depends on the barn. If you've got a level 2 barn or a level 3 barn, it's a good bit faster. But you're at about day 24 of day 27 at that point if you're on a level 3 barn. Yeah.
You know those memes of when you start something, you're like this beautiful figure, and then we could do a quick meme on day 24, and you're all like crazy disheveled, and you're like, oh my god, you're not sleeping, you're just going nuts, you're checking it every single second. So
Yeah.
is that how, like, as the days go, right? Do you get more and more anxiety about it?
It felt that way early on, and then I think once you get several breeds deep, you get, I don't know, well, you just get a better confidence and a better feel for it. So you kind of lose a little bit of that paranoia. But honestly, like I think the paranoia can be a little healthy too. So like I don't want to lose it entirely.
It's true.
You
You can never be too cocky.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly. So a wolf, I was paying attention to wolfgame.page. Sure enough, a new wolf popped up in my community. Now, the other wolves that were in the community, they've been dormant since January. So you can see when the last time they attacked. And you can see, obviously, if they're like moving around on the screen. So like they literally, it was very obvious that like the owners of those wolves weren't playing the game. So like I'm not worried about them attacking. What I'm concerned about is wolves from players who are very active and wolves that have enough energy to try to steal sheep. So those are some of the metrics that I look for. So a wolf popped up in the community, and I had a lot of time invested into this breed. So I was like, I'm going to add a farmer. I added a farmer, and then sure enough, it was like 30 minutes later, the wolf attacked the barn. And luckily I had a farmer in there. But dude, yeah, I mean, I felt so badass. Like I just like, I felt like I beat the wolf, and I was like, like wolves can go to hell and all this stuff. Like I was just pumped. I was like telling my friends about it. Oh man, it was fun. But
Yeah.
that was my first survivor sheep. So that was a successful story. And then, believe it or not, 2 days ago, I had my first barn was broken into. Someone got 320 chops from me, and yeah, that was not a good feeling. But
A little payback.
yeah, it was a different player. Kudos to them. It was something that like when you decide to go the breeding route, you got to embrace the fact that that's going to happen, and that's part of the game. But I will say, what I really care about is overall track record, right? Like if that happens every single time, then yeah, like I got to pivot my strategy. But overall, it's been successful, and I'm very excited about how it's going. And breeding is something that I'm not just going to quit because, my barn got broken into and I missed out on those chops, and I missed out on, the, just cost, the time and all the resources that were put into that breed.
What would you say an asset in wolf game that is severely undervalued at the current moment?
Definitely wolves. I think wolves are massively undervalued. If you look at, so I was this last week, I was kind of like doing some just looking at some data. And usually, with my strategy, I try to like look at the data and then kind of think, okay, well, what important metrics can I kind of calculate with this data? So a good example is, how much wool does it cost to produce a peak credit for a wolf and for a sheep? And all the data is there, right? But you gotta do the calculation yourself, because there's no dashboard that shows that, or at least there's not one that I'm aware of. But it's not hard, right? So all you got to do is say, okay, for let's say an A6 wolf, and the recharge rate on the peak, the floor was like 11,000 wool, and so you can say, okay, for 11,000 wool, I can produce, X amount of peak credits. And then if you look at the farm, like, okay, for a Gen Zero sheep, it a realistic rate. You can't just take the lowest one, because that might be like 8 communities over, and it's just you can't even get there. But a reasonable rate, depending on where you're at in the farm, is like, okay, 7,000 wool. You can probably find a recharge for 7,000 wool. Well, if you do the math, the cost to produce the peak credits for the wolf is less than 1 wool per credit. It comes out to 0.92. For the sheep, it's over 7.5 times more expensive. It's 7 wool per peak credit. Okay, wow. So I look at that and I'm like, okay, first of all, let me state the assumption. I believe that number has to be much tighter for it ever to make sense for sheep to use their energy on peak credits. Okay. If I'm going to be a sheep owner and I'm going to use my energy for peak credits, it has to make sense economically. Okay. So the pricing on the amount of wool it takes to produce peak credits for a wolf and a sheep, they're going to be different. Like, don't get me wrong. I think wolves they're going to be more efficient. You're going to be able to produce more peak credits for less wool over time. But that spread is way too massive. 7x it's out of whack. So it means one of two things. It either means the wolves are severely underpriced and that the energy is too cheap to recharge. So basically the bath rates on the peak should be much higher, or the wolf game community has kind of overpriced sheep. They've overpriced the sheep energy. We're paying too much wool to actually recharge these sheep on the farm. Now, the reality is it's usually never binary. I love spectrums. So it's probably a little bit of both, right? So I believe right now, wolves are severely undervalued. I also believe the sheep, the cost to recharge sheep is too high. So it's like, there's some ramifications there, right? So if we get more information on peak, we may realize like, oh dang, like it's all about wolves, right? And we have a situation where the wolf price for bathing and the floor goes up, but also the sheep cost of bathing maybe goes down. And if that happens, honestly, the farm structure floor will probably follow it. It's been directly correlated the whole time. It makes a lot of sense because, right, like that floor pricing for structures on the farm is going to follow basically what the ROI is on wool for the most part, generally speaking. But that's kind of like what I'm using to say, okay, I don't want to buy a structure right now. I'm actually going to have a little more patience there. I'd rather own the wool. But also, another thing to think about here, going back to our conversation about breeding 375s versus 750s, if wool is abnormally high right now, the cost for bathing a sheep, that means you are accelerating that problem for yourself. So not only you're already having to recharge constantly because you're breeding 375s, but if you're doing that and you're paying an arm and a leg, you may wake up in another year and be like, I played the game horribly because not only was I was overpaying for these recharges, but like, I did that at a much faster rate than some of these other players, if that makes sense. So I don't know. I
Yeah.
think it's really important to kind of like take these things in and realize the risks, right? The risks of just churning through that wool, the risks, honestly. And I'm a huge fan of like Swap Shop, and the tool they built is amazing. But the reality is, if you're paying for efficiency to do a quick swap, there's a real cost associated to that. And some points in the game, it might not make sense to do that, right? So there's just a lot to think about.
Yeah. It truly is fascinating. And also, you have to think about the time element, right? The time that it's going to take them to recharge. So Swap Shop is huge. Like when you're like looking at a pros and cons of Swap Shop, Swap Shop. That is literally that's a big line item right there in the pros, is that time not to have to bathe.
Yeah.
So
and
if you have a lot of,
I've used it, by the way. I have used it, and I'm glad I did. Don't get me wrong. I'm also just trying to surface, hey, these are things that we got to think about. You can't just blindly just spend all this wool. You may find yourself in a bad spot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What's fascinating is that Shep has the amazing ability to balance the whole economy out, right? Can you speak a little bit about that? I mean, there's just so many different angles that you can play the game, and they all kind of just come full circle.
Yeah, it's funny. Like that was, I don't know if there's one thing that really stood out to me after Full Game launched last December. Immediately, I was like, "Holy cow! Like this game is balanced, very balanced from the." From the way the farmer spacing is from a Joe all the way up to a Big Daddy, Big Mama, which I understand that, like, whatever, it pissed some people off that were a little overly invested in expensive farmers. I understand that. But the balance there of how it's not skewed exponentially towards Big Daddies, that's really important. It's really important for the balance of the game. The other side of it is even the mini games, right? Like when it comes to the mini games of, the Wolf's Gambit, and the balance in those games, the way it's not skewed towards wolves or towards sheep, right? Like both players come into those games and they have to take risk, and they have to play strategically. It's not like neither one has an unfair advantage. Now, overall, wolves have unfair advantages across the board, but it's not unfair, right? That's why it's called Wolf Game. It's called Wolf Game for a reason, and we're all okay with that. But if you think about breeding, for example, breeding, it's very risky from a breeder's perspective to breed sheep, but also, man, like if you don't have a peak bath, and maybe multiple wolves, like if you don't have the assets to be able to just kind of like recklessly break into barns and recharge because there's no cost to you, like that's a seismic risk, right? For someone like yourself that has the lone wolf or whatever, that's something that you got to think about. You got to be very calculated. You don't want to just break into a barn and then you're like, oh shit, that was the wrong decision, and now I'm kind of in the corners. Sorry, I'm not trying to speak for you.
Sure was.
Shit.
Oh my god, man! Literally, I think it was it's about a month and a half ago, and I attempted that. I had the Orvis tool. Shout out to Orvis, and I was so excited to steal a sheep. And I got freaking blocked by a Big Daddy, dude. And, like, it literally sucked my soul. And then, talking about how much wool it took to recharge that wolf. Oh, my God. It was like, I don't know, 50,000 wool. And just like, now I got to pay this. It was literally, I don't know. I mean, it was literally running into a buzzsaw. So I have to be. It makes me reconsider rating, especially at this moment. And dude. Speaking about Gen 2 sheep, right? They have to be valuable because of the amount of energy and risk it takes on both ends, right?
Oh
To
yeah.
from a sheep. But dude, it was like 750 energy that was wasted on getting blocked by that farmer. So can you speak a little bit about your thoughts on G2 sheep and what they're made to do, and are they undervalued at this moment?
Yeah. Okay. So if you're looking at like just pure ROI for the next 6 months, I honestly don't know if like sheep are like undervalued right now. I really don't know. Um, I know that like I know where the game is going, and I know that if you zoom out a little bit, sheep are just massive, like horribly undervalued. Um, there's no doubt in my mind about that. So like I don't make decisions in wolf game on a 6 month ROI. Like I that's not how I'm playing the game. That's not how I'm positioning myself. So it's hard for me to kind of speak to the shorter time frame, right? But if you zoom out enough, yeah, I think they're massively undervalued. Um, and you mentioned like, okay, like what do sheep do for you? Well, I think I don't know. I keep going back to like a big word for me is optionality, right? Like, um, if you look at the game, the economy, um, just the way the game is designed. For example, chops, they're literally the game is designed for chops to always. I say always. Uh, the game is designed for chops to continuously go up against other resources in the game. I believe we're going to have some corrections there along the way. It's just going to work like any other, asset that goes into price discovery. Um, but yeah, chops are a really big deal as far as like resource accumulation. Um, from like the aspect of, okay, if you burn this sheep and you trade it for resources, well, as the game goes on, those sheep should be worth more resources as it goes on, be based on their chop value, if that makes sense. Um, so there's that. There's the other part of it, which is the rechargeable energy, um, and for peak credits. So to me, I don't really know which one of those is going to play out to be the to have the biggest impact on my overall game. I think they're both really important. The idea of producing this maximum energy, like we talked about, that's really important, and I want to be able to use those peak credits in the future. But also, there's the chop value, um, and then that doesn't even count the fact that sheep also have this ability to gather resources as well. So I don't know, there's a lot of different directions um, that the game can go, but I think overall, the like basically the way I viewed my flock, I call it my flock because I guess that's what it is. I care about maximum energy, yes, but I care about my maximum, like my chop value, which I mean those things are tied together obviously because one one maximum energy equals one chop. But like for example, think about the impact of the game. If you've been playing for the last 6 months, I started with two Gen Zero sheep worth and so that's 2,000 maximum energy is 2,000 chops. Um, and I faced a decision. I could either gather with those Gen Zero sheep and produce value in the game and start accumulating resources, or I could use those Gen Zero sheep to breed. And to me, that was the no-brainer. Um, I've equated that to like it's like owning a Gen Zero sheep and using it for collecting is like having a Ferrari and only going 10 miles an hour. It makes zero sense. Why do you even own the Ferrari? Just get a bike, right? Uh, so to me, the utility is really important with how you utilize those sheep. So, for example, now with those Gen Zeros, I've bred I think 7 sheep now, and among those 7 sheep, let's say I've got about 3,000 chops value. Okay, so if I were to burn all of my Gen 2 sheep right now, it's like not even close how many resources I could have right now if I wanted them because I've been breeding versus using those Gen 0 sheep to actually collect. Does that make sense? So like
Mm.
I'm not collecting resources with my Gen 0 sheep, but the capacity that my bag has to produce resources is infinitely higher when I'm breeding with my sheep. And it's because chops are designed to go up against resources, and that is not going to change. That's not going to change at all.
So what happens when peak gets called? Are you bringing those sheep to the peak?
I gotta get more information on that. Right. You know, we're gonna learn a lot with the peak. Whatever they're gonna call it. We have the peak. I don't know if there'll be a peak paper or what. But I will say this: I have positioned myself to have fully charged sheep. So over the last 3 weeks or so, I've been focusing on recharging my Gen 2s. So I was able to position them where I'm getting some pretty good deals on jugs. And I went ahead and charged them all up. And then I started collecting with them again. So at any point, I can stop my collection, and I've still got a ton of energy that I can convert to peak credits if I want to. So I did that with sort of like an anticipation of peak coming. But yeah, once we get more information, it'll be like, okay, what are my options? I'm leaning towards just breeding through peak, not using my my Gen 0 sheep and my Gen 1s, not using their energy for peak credits and just focusing on breeding. Primarily because I think peak is going to distract the wolves even more. I think as peak comes out, wolves are going to be using their energy on peak credits and playing peak games, and I think that's going to make breeding even more attractive for people like me. Just because, yeah, as that happens, like you won't need as many farmers protecting. It just should be a lot easier for the sort of like the foreseeable future, until maybe some of the buzz dies down, or maybe peak is on a 4-week timer, and then after 4 weeks we're done and we kind of go back to business as usual. But I do expect wolves to kind of be distracted, and rightfully so. I think the ROI for them is going to be better at the peak than it will be attacking barns.
Fascinating. The real question is, can Piddy see all the excitement going on and then not partake in it and just be okay with staying on the farm and breeding? That's a real that's a real like zoom out approach right there, and I think that it could certainly fare well, especially if you have a fair amount of sheep. Right. I mean, like I'm most likely going to play with my wolf just because I want the excitement, because I feel a little bit dead inside, and I think a lot of people do. So,
that makes sense.
Yeah. But if people are thinking that way, right, it just comes down to your theory of, okay, then you should be breeding with your sheep because there's going to be crazy opportunity.
The other thing there is a big metric for me on whether or not I'm going to use my energy to spend on peak credits. It comes back to that wool that I'm spending per peak credit. I'm not going to spend 7 wool per peak credit if I'm not gaining, basically if I'm not winning more wool back. Like that's just a losing deal, right? So we'll see how fast the market kind of responds to that, and maybe seven wool per energy to recharge and get a peak credit. Maybe it makes sense economically, and maybe that's a better return than the breeding. But the nice thing is, once I have all the information and the market tells us what the prices are, like I'll be able to make that decision pretty easily.
Sure.
And most likely it doesn't matter how expensive it is. I'll probably take at least a sheep and I'll convert it to peak credits, and I'll have some fun. But if it's super cheap to just buy cheap, peak credits from like a wolf that has a lot that he wants to sell, I might just do that, because that would be cheaper than spending my energy for my sheep and then having to go recharge them. So
yeah. What's a prediction you have for the future of wolf game that may surprise others?
I believe we are going to see a chops correction, and it's strictly based on the lack of utility that we've had for resources That's going to change. We're going to have the ability to use resources on the peak. So there's going to be increased utility there. But then also when we get structure levels 4 and up, which we know are coming eventually, that's going to increase the utility as well. So the lack of utility and resources has really positioned people where they're just trading their resources for chops, which makes sense. Like I said, the game is designed for that to be a smart play. But I think it's overinflated chops over the last, 5 or 6 months. They've been on a raging bull market. I expect chops to go through normal price discovery algorithms, just like everything else. Number one, Shep said that was going to happen. Like, it's in the wallpaper. The game is designed to work like that. So I expect chops to go through corrections just like everything. And it seems like we're kind of positioned for that to potentially happen here over the next like month or so. So yeah, watch out if your chops maxi. If you just hold, you'll be fine. But if you want to have some fun and potentially try to do a little trading, there might be some big moves coming up, some volatility that you can capitalize on top of.
If you had to convince someone to play Wolf Game, what would you say to them?
Yeah, dude, that's a great question. And honestly, I've been working, so I put some thought into that over the last like few days. I'm working on a thread called like why I'm so, effing bullish on Wolf Game. And I know like the biggest thing for me is Shep. Um when I've been in the NFTs since, most of us have been here since like November, or I should say October 2021, right? So it's only been really popular for a few years. I wanted to find a project that was building something real, that was going to be an excellent product. I want to invest in a team that delivered, and I want to also invest in a community that is smart enough to really see true value. And honestly, like Wolf Game has all of those things. But I think starting with Shep, like he has delivered time and time again. To me, those things are more important than, oh, I love my PFP. Don't get me wrong, but like the aesthetics of the NFTs, yeah, they're badass. But it's because the hard work that was put into them. I'm investing in the people. I'm investing in the project. I want to invest in something that's real and isn't just some cheap, shitty marketing hype, right? And like that is Wolf Game. Honestly, it's almost surreal that like I've been for the last 10 years, as I kind of got out of, I got out of college. I guess it's been 15 years now. Got out of college and like, pursued my career, trying to, we're starting a family and all this stuff. I've been salivating for finding an opportunity like Wolf Game. I've been hunting for that opportunity. I knew that crypto was the space, and I've had some success with Bitcoin and Ethereum, but there's no doubt in my mind NFTs are going to be absolutely huge. And I want to be on a project that is set up for success, that is designed in a way that scales, okay, that can onboard thousands of users, that is fun and exciting. I mean, and literally Wolf Game checks all those boxes. I know that like we're still in a bear market and there's negative price action. But the reality is like, that comes with the bear market. That's to be expected. And I don't care how good of a project you have, like Bitcoin is, arguably like the best invention, like since the wheel, right? like the greatest crypto asset, Bitcoin, goes through corrections. It goes through bear markets. We can't, like, Bitcoin can't even stop that. So obviously, like, if we go out further on the risk curve, we go into some of these shit coins. Even if we go into to projects like Wolf Game that are absolutely producing value, I fully expect it to be, affected by a bear market. That doesn't surprise me. But I know for a fact that, if you pick the right projects, if you identify real value and you invest in a team like what we've got here and in a product that's honestly as good as Wolf Game, nothing compares to it, man, the next 2 years are going to be really fun. Or the next 3, like, I'm just saying, with the next bull market that comes around, there's going to be so many people, so many resources that are looking for what Wolf Game has to offer. They just don't see it yet. They haven't found Wolf Game, but we're positioning ourselves to really capitalize on top of that. And if you're smart and you've identified wolf game, be smarter and actually play, breed, play the game, grow, like take it seriously. Because, as you do that over time, like I said, when the next bull market comes around, if I've got a flock of 20, 30 sheep, I've got optionality, right? Maybe I can rent them out. Maybe I can use them for peak credits, whatever. But yeah, we're positioning ourselves for success. That's for sure.
Yeah. And I'll tell you who shouldn't be in wolf game are the people who are very short-sighted.
Yep.
And who are the flip wars
yes.
out there. It's not for you. Wolf game is not for you, so go somewhere else. If you're expecting, overnight number go way up, then, you're going to be let down. This game is for the entrepreneurs, the big-brained, the visionaries, and the passionate gamers, right? This game is for them.
Yep.
It's not for the flippers. So if you're a flipper, you're out.
The funny thing there is ultimately, like, wolf game actually offers them what they're looking for. If they're looking for gains, like, there's no doubt in my mind, like, there's going to be some massive gains on wolf game. So I'm not discounting that, but you are absolutely right. If you're just wanting to, like, make a quick flip or something like that, like, this project is not that. Like, if you want to be on the hype train and just find a project that only cares about, like, what can they do to, like, make the price go higher? Like, what can they say or do to just quickly make the price go as high as possible? That's not what wolf game is. They're building something real, something that is, tangible, that scales. They're building a really cool product. But things like that take time. Wolf game is very similar to Bitcoin in this side of the argument, in that a lot of people, they're looking for the next Bitcoin, and that's why they're going into shit coins. They look at Bitcoin and they're like, oh, it's like whatever. It's it's boomer coin. Its upside is behind it, and so even going back to 2017 when I got into the market, I kind of thought I missed out on Bitcoin. And then I was like, I'm going to chase all these shitcoin projects because I want to catch the next one. And I had that mentality. Looking back, all I ever had to do was just fucking buy Bitcoin. like all you got to do is buy Wolf Game and play it. Take it seriously. Join in on the fun. Like, don't worry about making a 2x tomorrow. The sooner you let the stress of that go and you just focus on strategy and, how you can play the game better, it'd be amazing. It's amazing what can happen. Even in the short span of 6 months, 6 months ago, I had 2 sheep, but now I've got those sheep and I've got a number of Gen 2 sheep. So, when this bull market catches up with us and new people start pouring into the crypto space, I'm going to be really well positioned because I've been spending my time growing my bag through either buying more, DCAing wool, and through breeding. So it'll pay off.
Share your most controversial opinion about the game.
It's funny. I've got some controversial thoughts. Probably the biggest one is the chops, like anticipating this chops dip. I've hit some pushback from some chop maxis on Discord and Twitter. They're well intended. They think their chops are going to go up endlessly, which I kind of agree it's going to happen, but I believe nothing goes up only. So yeah, that's the other thing. The other thing is, like, I push back really hard on just community members that kind of like pick apart the game and that like they're just always looking for something to like complain about. And that kind of gets some pushback for some negative people. And I understand, like, everyone needs to be able to voice their opinion. Everyone's opinion matters. Those things are really important. But overall, I have a kind of like a take that if everyone would just, play the game really hard and stop complaining, we'd all be in a much better situation. If that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. I think it comes down to people are just they're overinvested.
Yeah,
And
yeah, that's a good point.
they're impatient, and which I get. It's you're dealing with money. People can get funny, right?
Yeah,
But now's not the time to feel defeated.
yeah, yeah,
Peak paper could come out any moment here,
yeah.
and I get it. If peak paper comes out and it just blows, I get that somebody could be a little more pessimistic about things,
Yeah.
but. If anything, that's just going to drive people away from the game. I mean, we need to band together,
Yep.
and we need to like you said, play the game, have fun, think strategically, have talks like this. This is so much fun to do, and I think that we're going to be well positioned and well rewarded
Yep.
for our efforts. You're big on wool, right? I mean, your big prediction I see on Twitter is $15 wool, right?
Oh yeah, that's a huge. I didn't even think about mentioning that. That's a very controversial opinion. That's definitely bigger than some of the other
That's
ones
good.
I
That's
mentioned.
why
I'm glad you pointed it out.
Yeah. That's why I took some notes. All right.
Yeah, exactly. $15 wool sounds just asinine. And it's funny, that's gotten more like engagement from like people that I've never seen or heard of on Twitter. I think from even people that like, they're not really in Wolf Game. They're just kind of whatever, searching through cash tags on Twitter or something. But yeah, that one is very controversial. I think people overall, and this has to do with both like price discovery in both directions. Wool has dropped a lot lower than the community anticipated it would, me included. Like I didn't see it going under a penny. I will say when it did, I have been taking full advantage of accumulating as much as I possibly can because the market's wrong. And that's going to correct. But the main thing here is it's gone a lot lower than people have thought possible. It can also go a lot higher than people think is possible. When you look at the tokenomics, the amount of wool that we are burning, even like right now, and the game hasn't even really heated up yet. I mean, this literally, wool has an entire ecosystem, a team building, a community around it, and all of it is designed to burn wool. It's designed to burn wool and create demand for wool. So it's literally, I can't find another project in crypto that has that infrastructure set up to just literally pump the hell out of it. In another 3-4 years, yeah, the amount of wool that's in circulation is going to be a lot lower. There's going to be a lot more players in the game. Like I view the upside on wool is massive. It's almost infinite. It's as big as Wolf Game can scale, and Wolf Game is set up to scale massively.
That's the only thing I can see flippers be, attracted to. If there is one asset to buy in the Wolf Game ecosystem, it's wool.
Or maybe the flippers will really have an appetite for peak. I think it's a very legitimate view that peak is going to appeal to a different type of player. So going back to what you were saying earlier, if Wolf Game is for the entrepreneurs, this business owner mindset. I have that mindset. A lot of the people that are in the community right now, those are the people that have stayed, that have taken it seriously. They have a vision for what Shep is building, but also they have that entrepreneurial spirit. And I think there's a strong likelihood that peak is going to appeal to a certain type of player that the farm does not. And that's actually cool. And if Shep designs it that way, that is actually going to be a great thing. Go play peak and, get the hits of dopamine and have all the risk. And by the way, here's some peak credits. You can buy them from me. Right. So, but yes, two very different players' mindsets.
What would you say the most overvalued and undervalued resources are?
So I have a pretty strong opinion that grass and wood are pretty severely undervalued. And I actually think water and stone are overvalued. Um, Now, I say that, don't forget, like, I'm not trying to contradict myself of saying, like, oh, I expect chops to correct. I'm just saying when you look at the resources, the four core resources, wood, grass, stone, water, and you compare them to one another, it's pretty out of whack. So like my baseline that I look for is okay, what is the way Shep designed the game from a total farm output? And then I believe that's actually the point of equilibrium that resources should kind of like revisit and kind of like float around, if that makes sense. So if you look at the total farm, and the total farm output is, let's say for water and for stone, it's 5 water and stone per day. It's obviously a lot more, but let's make the math simple. But then you look at grass and wood, and okay, let's say it's 8 grass and 8 wood per day. Well, over time, prices should at least bounce around those levels. And right now, it's not even anywhere close. Like if wood and grass were to revisit kind of like the point of equilibrium for what the farm output is, you're looking at like stone and water taking a pretty big hit against wood and grass. I think a big reason why it's so out of whack is just because we haven't had the utility for the wood and the grass. Obviously, we have had a lot of utility for the stone and the water, because out of the gates, like, everyone realized, oh shit, it's all about energy. We need to be able to recharge this energy. Everyone's building bathhouses. Yeah, like, there's no doubt that is going to make water and stone pump. But the reality for the whole ecosystem on breeding has not kicked in. People do not have enough incentive to go breed in the game right now. I believe strongly that peak is going to open their eyes to that. Peak is what is going to it's going to incentivize breeding. But right now there's no incentive for it. You kind of have to like buy into the vision of what Shep is building and position yourself accordingly. So I've been stacking wood and grass because people aren't paying attention to it. And typically in this game, or just in everything in life in general, when no one wants something, that's usually the time where I want to start buying it and focusing on it. And then when it's in high demand, that's typically the time I want to be scaling out of it.
Excellent point. If I'm water and stone heavy, which is the opposite of what you are, you son of a bitch.
Oh, sorry.
What would you would you recommend taking the hesitance on my end to convert the water to grass, or stone to grass, or stone to wood, or is primarily in looking at the charts and trying to. I guess I'm possibly just trying to time things too much, right? I'm constantly looking at a couple times a day, the ratios between the two, and it's harder for me to say, all right, I'm gonna make this move.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
It's hard, and I think it depends on your bag and your situation. Like, do you have a structure that you're trying to upgrade? To get, like, are you trying to upgrade a bathhouse, for example? So like, please, interpret everything I'm saying is also within the context of my strategy and my bag. Like, I don't own a structure right now. I don't feel the pressure of needing to upgrade a bathhouse to a level 2 or something. If I did, I would obviously have a lot more water and stone right now, because I'd be working towards that. So, I don't know if that helps, but it's
no, it does. But also thinking about, which we touched on before, is the possibility of structures taking a huge dip, right? And there being a big opportunity to pick up some really cheap structures.
Yep.
So that's like, I don't know, I like to look at the real world, and I like to buy real estate, right? So if I'm investing in real estate, I'm looking for that passive earn. And if you are a wool maxi, right, that could be a really good play. So that was like my initial, okay, I'm going to, even if at some point I was able to get a den, if I was able to buy a peak den, or thinking about putting together a group that we might end up almost like a DAO, purchasing a den together.
That's cool.
Yeah, I just think it would be very interesting, and it's a good strategy. But being able to build resources for that, for the real estate, and I think that's huge.
Yep.
All right, so going into if you could have a real life version of any asset in the game, what would it be and why?
It would definitely be a wolf. Well, this is kind of a joke. I lay awake at night, realizing that I don't own a wolf, neither a real wolf in real life or a digital wolf in the game. So, that is something that I am missing in my life, and I've positioned myself in the game intentionally with the sheep, but I don't know. It's gonna haunt me. It could haunt me for the rest of my life that I don't have a wolf. And honestly, there's the other thing is I know for a fact there's no better time to buy a wolf than right now. So yeah, I don't. It's
Look at how you're literally you're speaking like an addict right now. Shit. It's because of the strategy that you had, and this breeding. You could look at flipping, and it stings to flip during a bear, but if you can look at the price of wolves, they've been beaten up just in comparison to, so say you have 10 G2 sheep, offloading those for a wolf, you can make that argument. And that's the amazing thing about wolf game is you can make an argument for any asset.
Yeah, I will say this. I have, for the last 3 months, I've focused on wool accumulation. So I've accrued, I think I'm between my pouched and my raw wool, I'm around 800,000. If wool goes on like a 10x, there's no doubt in my mind wool is going to outperform every other asset in the game for the next several years.
But you want to play the game.
Yeah. But I want to play the game. So I'd be willing, once wool goes high enough, I'll swap that wool I'll swap the wool for a wolf. Right. So I'm not ruling it out. But I think right now, the best thing to do is for me to kind of keep my head down, own as much wool as possible, keep breeding. And let the game come to me. When the game comes to me, there will be a moment in time when I can sell a pouch or sell some raw wool, maybe sell a little bit of wool and some of those Gen 2 sheep, like you were saying, and get that wolf. But now is not the time.
Yeah. Thinking about optionality, that's wool pouches are the perfect option to buy. You're literally you're not backing yourself into a corner buying either liquid wool or pouch wool.
Yep.
I think pouch, which you talked about the drip, right? And the importance of it and what you could do with that.
Yep.
You used a lot of renting for farmers, correct? With your wool drip.
Yeah. So,
which kind of possibly have led to one of your biggest regrets, right?
Yeah. It's funny. About a month or two ago, I was having this fresh USD to put into the game, and you're faced with options, right? I was like, I know as the game grows, breeding difficulty is going to go up, but also the breeding timelines are going to go down, which makes farmers more effective. I was like, I know I'm going to need a lot more farmers, so I can either buy a farmer right now, or I could buy a wool pouch. And what I just ended up deciding to do, I bought a few farmers, so I've got 4 now. But what I decided to do was I was buying pouches. I mean, when wool was down below 0.07 or whatever it is, 0.07 cents, not 7 cents, but you get what I'm saying.
Which is kind of where it is right now, right?
There was pouches being sold 55, 60% discounted. Okay. So, that is why I was able to accumulate so much wool so quickly, But the cool thing is basically now I've got the upside of the wool, and I can use the drip to rent for my farmers, right? So like
Yeah.
I built my drip up to it was about 13,000, I think 13,000 a month, which honestly, like if you only have one breeding pair, that's actually enough wool drip to get a decent amount of farmer rentals when you think about the farmer rentals plus the the farmers I've already got. So yeah, it was a way to position myself where I can rent the farmers as I need them, and I've still got the wool. I've got the upside of the wool, and wool, like we said, wool's upside is as high as the game can scale, right? Like it is, wool can go 1,000x. I don't think farmers are going to go 1,000x. What would that put them at? Like a several hundred Ethereum floor? Like yeah, like that's probably not going to happen, right? It's likely not going to happen. So the nice thing is as the game goes on and wool gets more expensive and farmers, yeah, they still go up and they do well, but they're not going to outpace wool. What's going to happen is my drip today, let's say I can only afford 10 farmer rentals. Well, in another year with my wool pouches, I'll probably be able to afford 20 or 30 farmer rentals if I want to. So,
dude, screw this. I got to go to Blur right now, and I have to purchase some wool pouches. I mean, I'm starting, like, I'm having these, my mind blown epiphanies going, oh my God, what because you're not backing yourself into a corner.
No.
If you are buying pouches.
No.
And it's going to stay in tandem.
Yeah.
So even if wool does go up, right, the pouches value, if you had to move a pouch, that value is going to continually increase with the price of wool. And then if you are super emotional and you're like, oh, I got this liquid wool, I got to flip it because I need to do whatever. No, it's almost like it's an annuity, right? Yep. It's like it forces you to hold on to wool, which is just a brilliant move by the Shep, right?
Oh yeah.
But it forces you to use it in game.
Yep.
If you have that strategy. And I love that outlook.
Yeah, I almost changed my Twitter handle to Pouch Maxi at one point. So I just like it's obsessive.
I think I think there is a Asian market. I don't know. I don't know if you saw that maybe like 3-4 months ago. There was somebody in the Discord that had mentioned that there was an Asian buyer that was literally just buying crazy amount of pouches.
No, I haven't.
That's what they were doing. That was their strategy.
It's smart. I haven't paid attention, honestly. My buying has kind of slowed down a little bit here, primarily because my family, we're looking to move, and like I'm kind of having to fix some stuff up around my house. So I haven't had
responsibilities.
Yeah, I gotta be an adult. So my buying has slowed down a little bit. But let's say the other thing on the pouches that's just amazing is if you can get a pouch at like a 50 or 60% discount. Like when you go to sell it, if you can just sell it at like a 40% discount instead, or a 30% discount, like it's almost like trading leverage, but like you don't have the risk of leverage. Does that make sense? Like you're actually able to, like, it's like
you're having the epiphany, dude, now too. You're going,
there's like
oh my God, I got to go buy some more.
There's two dimensions to it, right? Like you essentially got leverage here because it's going up. The pouch value is going up with the raw value, and if you can trade that discount, like you're capturing the difference in that. That is very similar to leverage trading, but you don't have the risk of being liquidated.
Man, yeah, that's true. If you're a true numbers guy and talking about spreadsheets, right? You throw that in spreadsheets and you take all the emotion off the table.
Yep.
Once it hits that percentage, you sell it, boom, move it. All right, next, boom, 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 like clockwork. So there's definitely some big-brained individuals thinking that strategy, and I love that.
Yeah.
So what advice would you give our listeners to strategic thinking in the game?
Yeah, so like as far as like frameworks go for like what can you do to kind of position yourself for success, I think the biggest thing is picking a direction in the game. So one of the biggest things that I think hurts people is there's a lot of layers to the game, and it's easy to kind of get squirrel syndrome, and you kind of like you just get distracted, right? I've been there. I totally get it. But I think one of the best things you can do is pick a direction and kind of like, for me, I was like, I'm going to focus on breeding. And then from there, that helps define or shape, okay, what do I need to buy? So like my strategy is breeding. I'm looking at the game and I'm like, okay, breeding difficulty is going to go up. I want to be in a great position in another year to where I'm not like scrambling for farmers or wool. So it kind of like it helped make the decisions easier, the in-game decisions of like what should I buy or what should I trade for. So picking a direction is a big thing. Yeah, because it just makes decisions easier. But I think the other thing is reading. So like going back and reading the wool paper, reading the Shep's Twitter feed. I've read his entire Twitter feed, I think 8-10 times or something like that. I go back and I read the wool paper or the peak regularly because, as the game, evolves and things are changing, I can go back and refresh my mind on those things because there's probably details in there that weren't relevant back when I first read it, but now they are because something changed. So I'm a reading maxi on that side of things. But I think honestly, like one of the big things you can do is just spend time, like just be intentional about thinking about the game and ask yourself a lot of questions like, well, okay, you can look at the data in the game. You can look at kind of like what's happening. The breeding isn't really popular and the barn rates are really low for breeding. That's interesting. I wonder if I can capitalize on top of that, right? You ask yourself questions like that. That's what pushed me to trade my structure for a lot more. I traded it for like several farmers and several sheep because my structure that I was breeding in, it wasn't producing a lot of value for me at the time. It will in another few years. I wish I had a structure. But for now, the right move was I want to expand my breeding, and I've got all this capital tied up in this structure that I don't really need. I can just rent someone else's and I can pay him a few thousand wool. It was a no-brainer. So like look at the game and just look at the different data points and just ask yourself lots of questions, and you'd be surprised at kind of what creative ideas kind of come to mind.
Phenomenal advice from Farmer Piddy. Farmer Piddy, it has been an absolute pleasure, brother. And I definitely want to have you back on the show. I appreciate you taking your time and adding value to the community and myself, really getting me to think outside the box. And I love your talk about the optionality and also picking a direction, right, and going confidently in that direction because you could easily get sidetracked.
Yep.
And so what? How can anybody find you? You're on Twitter, correct?
Yeah, feel free to hit me up on Twitter. I'm not. My Farmer Piddy is in my name, but my actual Twitter handle is NFT Domini. And honestly, like if you have questions about strategy, hit me up on Twitter. Most likely, I have a thread that I've written on it, and I may not be able to like spend super time like rewriting threads, but I can give you a quick answer and even like maybe share a helpful resource that I've put together. My goal with my Twitter is really to help with that, especially as new people come into the game. Like I want it to be a resource to really help people kind of get acclimated to the game and kind of think outside the box.
Yeah, man. Your selflessness is certainly appreciated by the community, and that's what makes us special at Wolf Game. So we appreciate everybody for joining us on Outside the Den, and we look forward to seeing you in the next podcast. Thank you.